Hey, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting our students to learn what we teach. And I am Rob Alvarez. I'm the founder of Professor Game and professor of gamification and games-based solutions at IE Business School, EFMD, EBS University, and many other places around the world. And if this content is for you, then please go ahead and subscribe to our email list for free at professorgame.com/subscribe. Hey, engagers, welcome back to another episode of the Professor Game podcast. And today we have Jim with us today. But Jim, before we start, we need to know, are you prepared to engage?
Absolutely.
Let's do this. Let's go, because we have today with us Jim Samartino, who is a lead game designer for Secrets of the Lost Station, co-creator of Secrets of the Lost Tomb, conceptual writer for The Big Trouble in Little China, Legacy of Lo Pan, expansion game, and most recently author of the interactive children's book, Crow the Courageous. He's also a father of two. He has a degree in psychology and is a creative spirit who enjoys entrepreneurial endeavors. He's also the owner of Samartino Stories and his newest and third privately owned company. And he has participated in publishing over 125 short stories for board games. He loves movies, gaming, storytelling, and creative, positive experiences. Jim, I know you sent us this bio, but is there anything you want to mention before we start formally with the questions?
No, I think that was a fantastic recap. I really appreciate the introduction and very much appreciate being part of this podcast. So thank you.
Amazing. We're glad to have you here. And we like to get to know our guests a little bit more, further beyond a formal introduction, as we always do with our guests. So everybody has all those, all those big bucket items. We would like to know, what does a regular day with you look like? And we were talking in the pre-interview chat that this is not the only thing that you do in your life. So some insights into what does that look like would be pretty interesting as well.
Well, I'll try to give you the PG version because my usual day is a little crazy. It might scare a few of the audience. Essentially, it's easier to talk about what my normal week looks like. Monday through Friday, I work a 12 to 14-hour day. I'm a national strategic programs manager for a Fortune 100 company, so they keep me pretty busy on the day shift. The weekends, I make sure that I carve out for my family. As busy as I work, I want to make sure that I'm there and I'm present and living life, not just watching it pass me by. So I really enjoy playing games with them, lots and lots of movies. And of course, anytime we have some good weather out here in the US, I do like to get out there and play some sports with the kids. So at that point, where do I have time for the entrepreneurship? That's where one of the challenges come in. But as a passionate designer and artist, I like to try to carve out some time late at night and some of the times when the kids and the family is already in bed to really focus on that and scratch that creative itch.
So quite plentiful. Many things going on, definitely.
Robust, yes.
That's amazing. That's great to know that you're, doing all of these different things. That and one of the things that we were mentioning is, the fact that you have your regular job as well. You're also doing this. I kind of identify with that because I've been doing Professor Game podcast, a little bit of consulting, some games that we've been creating, a lot of teaching, a lot of workshops as well. So I kind of identify quite a bit with having, sort of I don't want to say a main or a secondary job, because at least for me in my mind, they're all almost equally important in many ways. But, having all these things going on is always exciting in many ways. And it gives you a lot more perspective. There's also all sorts of things that you can be learning out of all the different things that you're doing at any certain point, right?
Yeah, no, I like to think of it as one job pays the bills, the other one provides the thrills. And that's kind of how I approach it. Because one of the things with my company that was the origin of the creating Samartino Stories was the fact that we wanted to create memories for other people. That's kind of like my meaning for life, is to be able to create memories, both for myself and for the people around me. I find that really important. And while providing for the family is good, and that's what the day job does, I really have that passion of being able to provide that experience of a game or an art image or being able to read a story or something like that. I just love seeing people's reactions and, if possible, interacting with them as they're having experience, because it's really lives so much longer than the experience you're watching or experiencing that moment. it's something that will stay with you for a very long time. So I like being able to be a part of that. And with all the crazy things happening in the world, being able to sprinkle in a little positivity is something we live for.
Amazing. I love that. And, sort of talking about positivity, we actually want to go for a fail moment. One time when you were maybe creating one of your games, doing something related to this game or this story world that you're immersed into, and things just didn't go your way. And why do I say that this has to do with positivity? For many reasons, right? We could be discussing about this for hours, but among many other things, it's getting where you get to is not only because of the successes that you have, but also what you learn from the times that you didn't have a massive success or that you had your first attempt in learning or fail moment. So we want to be there with you. We want to hear that story, live it a little bit with you, and maybe take out some of the takeaways you got.
Sure. No, I think that's a fantastic question and a great lead in to some good conversation. So the first thing I would say is, I always learn to fail fast and fail forward. The true only failure you can get out of an experience is if you don't learn something from it. So when it comes to gaming, I found that the easiest and most frequent failure is when you want to hear that what you created is the best thing ever, and you have that feedback that tells you otherwise. It's that constant reminder that there's different opinions that are out there, and there's always different ways of approaching a particular subject matter. And you have to be able to navigate that properly, because feedback is critical. It's derailing and it's worth it. I know personally, what I kind of created in my own kind of mind construct is what I call the learning loop. It's called the DRAG method, which DRAG is an acronym for defensive, resistant, acceptance, and then growth. So taking you through that any moment of feedback as a game designer or a book designer, when you first create something and you show it and showcase it for the first time, again, you're expecting like, oh, this is great, great job. I can't wait to play the regular version. And oftentimes that's not what you get. And you tend to be defensive right when you first get that feedback. And then you kind of like leave the session, you have your notes, you put on a happy face, and then you review the notes. You're like, they have a point. You get to resistant, but you still don't want to give in. And then you give it a little more thought, and then you start getting accepting. And you're like, yeah, you know what? If I do make this change, it's not as big as I initially thought when I was resistant. And that's when you start hitting that pivotal change of growth. And then once you have that growth, that's when the magic happens. A couple of very particular recent events was in my most recent children's book, Crow the Courageous. I had taken it to my kids and I read them the story and they're like, oh, we love it. And I read it to my wife and she loved it. And then I spent months doing the artwork for it. And then I showed it to them. And I didn't get the same reaction I was hoping. Like, we love the story, but I didn't like the art. And my wife had given me some great feedback saying, oh, it needs to be more whimsical and I don't like the color schemes. And I was like, but I'm right about to release it. Like, what are you telling me that it's not perfect right now? And again, I went through that drag method. And at the end of it, I tweaked a few things. I made a few changes. I learned a lot in a very quick, nimble fashion. And at the end of it, we all loved the output. And when I presented it to the broader audience, kind of that test and learn, the broader audience had received it in a much, much better way. And I'm really thankful for the feedback. Initially, I wasn't. But having gone through that drag, then at the end of it, I came out a better person and produced a better product.
That's exactly what we're looking for when we are talking about failure. It's not about, how your heart got crushed or anything of the sort. It's actually to understand that we can all go through these stages. We are actually all probably going to go through these stages. And to understand that this failure is not fatal and it's not final. And there's a lot to learn from it, right? There's many things that we can grab from this and actually implement it in the future. I don't know if you agree or disagree with this, but hopefully we are sort of in the same page and that kind of thing.
Absolutely, 100%.
Amazing. So let's actually shift. Let's go to one of those times when, you actually mentioned how this actually shifted, that failure moment, it actually shifted into getting a much better product and it was actually a success. So let's actually go for a success story. Again, whether it was on the first or the nth attempt, right? We want to be there with you and perhaps take a look into some of what you would call those success factors that got you there.
Sure. I would say one of my biggest successes, which is also overcoming a challenge, so I can tie it to that prior conversation. I like to treat life as a game. My kind of mantra is level up. I really like to look at life as a gamification. I like to understand, the environment that I'm in or the challenge that I'm facing, whether it be a project or a story or a video or whatever I'm doing, make sure that I'm engaging and then achieving the success that I hope to get out of that. And one of the biggest challenges that I had was designing Secrets of the Lost Station. It's an episodic game that has over 100 plus mini stories that are a part of it. And while I was designing that for Everything Epic, I was working with my business partner, Chris Batarlis. And as we were designing everything, my workload for my regular job was becoming a conflict with the main position. And I actually had to leave the organization during like halfway through my story development. But I was determined to be able to complete it. So even though I was designing it for a company I was no longer working for, it was a passion project. It was one of my big kind of opus sort of ideas. And I wanted to make sure that even with limited resources, because my time didn't change, high expectations, because this was a sequel of Secrets of the Lost Tomb, a very well accepted game, and the extreme time constraints, I wanted to make sure I was still able to deliver the project. So little by little, I was able for 2 years, I worked on that, continually sacrificing and keeping my eye on the prize, what I call the horizon line. And I kept focusing just one step at a time. The Navy SEAL mentality of just take that one step. If you took that step, you can take one more. And I just kept on progressing little by little. I got a team of people to help collaborate because, heavy lifting is best done with more than one person. And little by little, I was able to achieve getting that 100 plus stories created. And we were able to create a massive story arc. So not only was it just 100 mini stories, but it was 100 mini stories that were interconnected. And that, when it all comes together with all the challenge that were faced in its creation, the separation from the organization, and the scale of the overall project, but still ending up with a family-friendly experience, which I do hope becomes a streaming movie at some point, because I can't wait to see it come to life on screen. Hearing those feedback that I got from people when they actually got to open it up and experience that really did make it all worth it. And that's definitely, to this point, one of the biggest achievements I have in the world of gaming.
Amazing. And it's very inspiring as well to see how you got there, all the things that you went through and how you actually managed to get to that success. So thank you very much for that story, Jim. Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification. And Jim, moving on to our next question, there is something that, of course, after listening to the way you've both failed and succeeded at different times, and you knowing that you've been doing this for quite some time, as you mentioned, you've been doing game design for a long time. You've also been doing stories for quite some while. If a project were to come up, let's say tomorrow somebody comes up to you and says, let's start and do this project here. Ideally, it has to do with games, with board games, whatever you want to go for, right? Mm-hmm. Do you have some form of a process, some series of steps that you do? Like, how does it look like? If again, tomorrow somebody came to you, what are the things that you would do to make that become a reality?
That's a great question. What I like to do is I have a methodology I call the ORC methodology, the ORC framework, ORC. And it stands for objective, resource, and challenges. Pretty much anything that you break down, whether it's choosing what you want to do for dinner, writing a book, creating a movie, developing a game, you can follow that same framework of objective, resource, and challenges. So once you have that framework and you're able to step back, start with the forest before you get into the trees, you can start planning out your project. Planning is the most critical part you can do in any design. And you want to start with understanding where you want to start, where you want to finish, and what that story arc looks like, keeping in mind your objective, resources, and challenging. And then you build the story by developing an experience. Remember, anything that you do is based off of storytelling. You have to have meaningful decisions. You need to make sure that the story and those decisions are time-bound, and ultimately what you're doing is memorable. Because if what you're having an audience either experience or make a decision on, if it doesn't contribute to the story arc, then you might want to reconsider why that was part of the original design. And at least from a high level, that's what I would recommend as a starting point. Measure twice, cut once, follow that ORC methodology, and develop that experience.
Sounds amazing. I love the phrase, that catchy phrase of measure twice, cut once, right? That's something that makes sense for, at least for most situations, for sure. And when you're thinking about these projects, of course, that's the way of starting. And again, I love the measure twice, because you want to make sure that you and okay, actually, let me take a step back. When I hear that, the first thing that maybe comes to mind to some people, some people might say, well, yeah, but what about iteration? But then, at least in my mind, and please correct me if that is the case, it is precisely with iteration that you're able to measure twice or many times, right? You're doing playtesting, you're checking with the audience, you're checking all these things, so that when you actually get into production, which is the actual point where you're saying you're cutting, especially when it has to do with physical product, that is when you say measure twice or as many times as you need, so that you actually cut just once. Does that make sense, or am I going in a completely different direction as what you
No,
meant?
that's definitely the direction that it needs to go in, because you want to plan conceptually. You want to work out your project pen and paper before you start spending money and building everything out. And exactly what you said, it's an iterative process. Most game designers, I mean, half the games that I develop are actually built with a coin, a die, and a deck of cards, and then just some scribbling of paper. And that's how everything starts. Just a mock up. It's a rough
Hmm.
draft. It's a concept. You play with it, and like you said, it's an iterative process. I have an idea. Be agile, test and learn. As you move forward with that, what did you learn? How can you grow? Begin to get other people's experience, that collaborative nature, stronger together. And then little by little, that iterative process, like you were saying, develops into a cohesive idea. And then once you have that cohesive idea, that's when you double check all of your work. And that whole process, that's the measuring twice part. Then you can move into production. Then you can start socializing on a broader scale.
Great, amazing. Thank you so much for letting us sort of a sneak peek into your head, into your process. And Jim, when we've been talking about some of your life stories, and of course you've gained a lot of experience from that. Now you just discussed with us as well your process. From all of that experience, and perhaps even a part of your process, is there something that you could call some sort of best practice, or something that you would say, well, when using games for a purpose, or creating games, or when using gamification, as you did mention as well, if you think about this, or if you do this kind of thing, it at least is going to help improve your project? Do you have anything in mind when I say these things?
Yes. When problem solving it, I'd actually give you a two-prong answer. One is when you're trying to come up with understanding the problem first. Before you solve it, you have to understand it. Always look for the root cause analysis of it. And again, that could be something as simple as making a decision on where you want to go to eat, to solving a game design and trying to get a balance into a game. Anything that you're looking for is, what's that obstacle that's in front of you? What's that challenge that's in front of you? And why does it exist? And question it. Go through the 5 why process. Does it exist just on the surface level? Or is there something causing that? Is there something causing that? Get to that root cause. And then once you understand the problem, you can start solving it. And when you go into the solution and you say, I have an idea on how to solve this, especially when we're talking about a game design and game theory, you want to look at, what is the most common solution? If it's X, what is the Y output for it? And then how can you be different? How can you separate yourself? Not so far where you're no longer solving it anymore, but how can you make it creative? And then that's the good answer. The great answer is then taking it one step further. What can you do to make it different? And then what can you do to make it special? If you can do that in a game design, in a story arc, regardless of what it is, that will allow you to stand out and give that meaningful experience to that person that is spending time. It's their investment, it's their commodity, to spend time to listen and watch or view and experience what you're presenting to them.
Sounds like a very sensitive thing to do. So thanks for that recommendation, and for putting it as well in such a articulated and way in which we can reflect upon what you said and take value out of even just the reflection itself, and of course out of your recommendation for sure. And talking about recommendations, after hearing this, and you mentioned as well that you have also listened to a few of the episodes of the podcast, hearing the podcast and hearing the questions now made to you, does anybody come to mind when you're thinking like, oh, maybe this person would be somebody I'd be curious about listening to, answering these questions, sort of a future guest for Professor Game that you would perhaps even personally be interested in hearing?
Oh, absolutely. I would actually give two recommendations. And once you're in the
Sure.
industry and you build relationships, it really is a synergy. You're not out there in a silo. The first one I would recommend is John Rott. He is the owner of Gatekeeper Games as well as the Havesies Dice. He is actually my long term friend. He was my friend all the way back in high school. And what was interesting is he moved out to California. I stayed out here on the East Coast. And one day we kind of called each other up and said, "Hey, how you doing? What are you doing?" I was like, "Oh, I'm designing a game." "Really? So am I." It's like, we're on the other sides of the country, and birds of a feather. And we were actually in the same part of the industry and didn't even know it. So John Rotnewski, John Rott would be one that I would recommend, and the other would be my old business partner, Chris Patarlis. He's done some amazing things over at Everything Epic. He's produced a lot of games directly. He's added a lot more value in some collaborative games, and as he's gotten a lot of great movie deals and innovative projects, I think you get a lot of great stories out of him as well.
Amazing. They both sound like great recommendations of people who are working, doing the work, putting in the hours and doing their thing in this industry, which is definitely something very exciting for many of us.
Mm-hmm.
And keeping up with that recommendations, what would you say is if I told you a book, a single book that you would recommend for the engagers, of course, right next to all of the books and the stories that you've written, which book would that be and why?
So, from a book standpoint, I of course have to recommend the first story that I done for the children, The Crow, the Courageous. And the reason for that is a little bit deeper. I mean, obviously it comes across initially as a sales pitch, and I'll always be selling, but it really touches from a personal standpoint. Being a father of two, and my daughter is about to turn 11, my son is 8, and in their youth, seeing how they grew up and comparing it to mine, I took my father's advice, which he probably told me my entire life, but I didn't listen to it until my 40s, was part of being successful in life and happy in life is being confident. And that doesn't mean that, you can do anything, but it means to believe in yourself to at least try to accomplish anything. And that's really what the story of Crow the Courageous is. It's meant for children from the ages of 4 up to about 9. And it's a creative story to help kids understand the difference between fear and courage. And it's such an important part for a child because when a child is introduced to new things in the world, they don't have the context that an adult does. And if they embrace fear, that'll prevent them from experiencing a lot of amazing things. So, in a very simple and cute story, The Crow the Courageous helps kids to understand the relationship between that fear and courage. But at the same time, just because you're afraid of something doesn't mean you have to do it. It doesn't mean you should continue, but it means to understand why you're afraid of it and challenge yourself, believe in yourself that if you do, you can exceed in what you're doing.
Exceed and succeed as well, for sure. That sounds amazing. And I love the fact that it is also including a personal story. And if it had to be somebody else's book as well,
Mm-hmm.
again, right next to your book, to the Crow the
Mm-hmm.
Courageous, would you have a book recommendation for our engagers as well?
Yes, I'll go a little bit more old school and give a couple more broad examples. I love the Dan Brown books. I love Tom Clancy. And I know a lot of people out there they're listening to a podcast. I encourage you to listen to books. A lot of us don't have that downtime to be able to crack open a book and read it. What I like to do, because I love stories, I love learning and creating and seeing what other people are doing. I really embrace that audiobook, and Dan Brown and Tom Clancy have a lot of their books that are out there. More specifically, you also have Monster Hunter International and Expeditionary Force. There are also some newer books that are out there. What I tend to do from a process, I'm a little bit of a method designer. I did obviously years worth of work on a sci-fi franchise. So when I was working on that, I made sure I was engaging in that Expeditionary Force, which has well over 11, maybe 17 books in the series. So as I was going through, even in my downtime, I was keeping my passive mind activated and listening to those stories on my long trips to work. And that was helping me keep in the theme, come up with some interesting and adjacent ideas to make my story better. Because every experience you have is another tool in your toolbox that you can pull out when ready and help that with your project.
Absolutely. Always getting inspiration from different places. If you're a writer, look at what other writers are doing for sure. And there's something interesting about this. When we're looking for inspiration, I heard this was a long while ago, and it's been sort of hitting me in different ways at different times of my life. There was this gamification designer and expert. It's called Marigo Raftopoulos. She was in the podcast early on. And one of the things she said is, we in gamification, we're looking at what games are doing to see how we implement it in, other areas that are not games themselves, right? And she said, well, at some point I started asking myself, well, yeah, we're getting inspiration from games. Where do games get inspiration from, right? And you probably have the same or a different answer, but from what she researched, right, one of the main places where you guys find inspiration is from real life, right? The things that are happening out there in the world. Oh, I saw this happening out there. Can I turn this into a game? Or this gives me an idea for a game. And again, this is not to say whether it's exactly that what you always have to look into, but looking into different things that are happening around you are always sources of inspiration. And hopefully what we're doing here on Professor Game can also be a source of inspiration for many of you engagers in the present, in the past, and hopefully in the future as well. So Jim, does that strike you in the right way?
It actually resonates very well with me. And that's actually why I picked Dan Brown and Tom Clancy as two of my favorite authors, is because you're right that life is reflected in a lot of what we do and inspiration in a lot of those games and projects. The reason I like them so much is because they take elements of real life. When you can identify with a protagonist, when you can identify with a situation, you're more engaged in the story. So when they say, hey, remember this historical event that happened over here? Remember this one that happened over here? Do you know what happened between? Well, no, not really. Well, you know those two bookends. Let me create a fictional arc to connect those two together that is wildly creative and only made up by them. But because it's bookended by those two real events, all of a sudden all of it becomes plausible. And that's actually what I did with the Legend of Lopan story that I'd created, that I'd written, believe it or not, because again, on Method, I was asked to create the design for this character and some of the story. When I created that character design, the story actually came out of me just doing research on the character. It was literally just meant to be a character design. I spent so much time. I think I wrote like 4 to 7 pages on I was like, Chris, I created a whole story here. So I handed it over to him, and eventually it turned into an expansion pack as an inspirational element to it. But that was the exact inspiration for that. I took that knowledge of what Dan Brown and Tom Clancy had done, and I said, okay, what occurred in the fictional story of Big Trouble in Little China? What did John Carpenter create in that? And then I took elements of real life and I said, what if I piece all of these things together? And little by little, by the end of it, I convinced myself that Lopan was a real person. So it's one of those fun things. If you can engage with your audience and you can do something that people can associate with, that can attach itself to real life, the more engaging it can be for them, the better experience people tend to have at the end of it.
Ha! Absolutely. Love it. So we've been talking about recommending other people and what other people are doing. But in this world, I mean, of course, besides that job that pays the bills that you were mentioning before, what would you say is your superpower? That thing that you do at least better than most other people out there?
Great question. And I love how you asked that. It's what is my superpower versus which one would I like to have, because that's a much longer list. I would actually say I have 3 that come to mind. And that would be being a visionary, being endurant, and what I like to call being a Jim of all trades. Instead of a jack of all trades, a Jim of all trades. From a visionary standpoint, it's interesting the way my mind works. When I'm given an idea, I'm given a task, I can pretty much see the story develop in my head. And I've described in a lot of the books I've written or the movies and shows and YouTube things that I've done that I already know where it's going to end. I already know every single part of the story. I've already watched it in my mind. And it's just I'm trying to get everything out of my head onto a paper so that I can show it to everyone else. So from a visionary standpoint, that's a really good way for me to be able to outline and storyboard the story, because I can literally visualize it in my mind. So that's what I mean by a superpower of being visionary. From endurant, I would say I took martial arts for 25 years. I was an instructor for 5, and I learned a lot of discipline and non-quitting spirit. And like I was describing before about working for 2 years on that project, even after having left the company, that I kept pushing forward. I was endurant during that entire time because I had my eye on the prize. I was disciplined and I was determined, and I was able to achieve that. And the last one is the Jim of all trades, which I wouldn't say I'm necessarily great at anything, but I'm pretty good at a lot of things. So that allows me to play in writing, being an artist, game design, video production, business savvy. So many different little elements, when sprinkled together, in and of themselves do a pretty good job. And really what helps elevate my performance is working with others and collaborating with others. Then just takes my baseline of what I'm good at and the things I can contribute, and then take other people's specialities, and it just helps create some magic. And that's part of the reason why I love being able to work with other people and collaborate on ideas, whether it's on consulting or a direct project. So if they be my three superpowers.
Sounds amazing. It allows you to display all the things that you're able to do and that you're excited about. And can I take a sort of a part of that concept of a Jim of all trades and say that maybe I'm a Rob of many trades or something like that? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Sounds amazing. So thank you very much for that, that very nicely put way of how you are excited about all the things that you're doing, because transmitting that energy and that excitement for all the stuff that you're doing is definitely contagious. So I hope engagers that you're being as well, you're now sort of contaged with all of the things that are going on through this Gym of all trades. And we're getting actually to one of the difficult questions. And being a game designer and having done all of this, you probably gained inspiration from many different games and many different things that you've played. You mentioned that you like gaming a lot as well. So we need to know, in your case, Jim, what would you say is your favorite game?
My favorite game, I would have to give a gaming experience. I'll build into the game itself. I'll see if the stream of thought will bring me there. Because with me, I literally, I'm a tapas kind of person. I like sampling a lot of things. I might not complete everything because I liked having that experience with it all. But I would say that from an experience, we talked about books, we talked about board games. Let me talk a little bit about video games. That virtual reality, I absolutely adore virtual reality. It's all about the storytelling, and it's all about an immersive experience in most of the things that I do. Again, playing a game or developing a movie or whatever it might be. But when you're actually able to become a part of it, the VR just took me literally to a whole different world. And with the PlayStation VR 2 having just released, I cracked open the box and I had my kids play it, and they were able to experience it with me. And just being able to stand in a basement, put on this visor, and then all of a sudden you are anywhere. So I would have to say my favorite game right now, because I'm currently playing it, is the Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. I'm a huge Star Wars fan, have been it for my entire life. And now to be able to literally step into the Star Wars world, not just watch it, not just hold a controller and move a character, but become that character, that is just something special. And we're talking about creating memories. That's creating a memory every single time I put on that headset.
Sounds amazing and sounds like very exciting, as being plenty of the things that you've mentioned, a Star Wars fan and definitely a gamer. The VR has hit me in different ways. I have a VR set from the let's call it now the old PlayStation. Some people get sort of feel this feel of seasick or car sick when they're on that. I haven't gotten there, but I don't know. I think I have to try it a little bit more on different games, because one of the ones that I was enjoying very much, but at some point, I did get a little bit dizzy. I don't know if it had to be precisely with flying, for example. It was the Iron Man game, the VR Iron Man. I don't know if you've played that one.
Yep. I'm a huge Marvel fan too. So I did have a chance to play that. And my comment with that is, yes, you have to definitely know yourself, and VR is not for everyone. But like we said, with all other game design, the game designers have really taken that to heart. First, it was, can we do it? Then how can we do it better? And then how can we make it apply to more people? And the configurations and the settings, especially with the new VR2 technologies, gives you the options in most games to, instead of do free movement, which is what creates that jarring experience, it's the fact that your body knows it's not moving, but your brain thinks it is. And then you have a disconnect, and that's what creates that vertigo. Yep. So having that ability to change those settings really does help the experience. And also, not every game is necessarily requiring that. So definitely do your research to go in if you are considering getting the unit. If you want to learn a little bit more about it, I actually just did a box opening video just the other day on the Samartino Story YouTube channel. So you can actually take a quick peek at that. There's plenty of that info out there. Do your research. And if it is the right thing for you, it truly is an incredible experience.
It definitely sounds like it. And again, I'm not saying I don't like it. It's just that depending on the experience, I guess it depends a lot on what it is that they've designed for. There was actually one. I went to a sort of a game convention that they made in Madrid. This is pre-pandemic. And one of the ones that I tried, that one was terrible for me. That one I did feel like really, really bad, because it had the way in which you moved. It was sort of a disc that you had on your feet, right? so that it was giving you directionality, right? So you sort of, and of course, even just getting used to it as a controller, it was already difficult enough. But the fact that you had to get used to it at the same time as you felt some weird movement around it, I guess, is, as you were saying, sending those weird signals to my brain. And I was devastated. Like I was really enjoying the concept of being inside the game. And because this was a shooter game, so you could move actually around. And it kind of made sense if I was, probably I would have needed to practice a little bit more. But my brain was saying, this is not working for us.
No,
So,
that's absolutely
ups
true.
and downs,
Mm-hmm.
but other things I have enjoyed a lot more. Definitely. Absolutely. So, James, we're arriving to the end of the podcast today. But before, of course, we let you go, we would like to know if you have any final piece of advice, any final words for the engagers, anything you want to not leave unsaid. And of course, let us know where we can find out more about you, your stories, your work, anything that you're doing. If you have a call to action or whatnot, this is the time to do that as well.
Sure. No, I'd love to. So I'll break it into three different parts. One will be a little bit about like the things to remember, that I hope you have as a takeaway from the conversation. One is the call to action. And then the last will be a little bit more of how to get in contact with me if you have any other questions. So the takeaways from today that I want the audience, the engagers, to be able to remember is when you're presenting anything, again, regardless of your medium, remember it's all about storytelling. And you need to know your audience. Who is this going to be going to? Remember that orc conversation we had earlier about the objective, resources, and challenging. I challenge each one of you to, like, next decision you make, again, if it's dinner, if it's where to go for a movie, whatever it might be, go through that orc. What are your objectives? What are your resources? What are your challenges? Always listen to feedback. It might not always be requested, but it is a gift in the end, and it does make everyone a better person if you can avoid the drag. Remember, avoid the drag, the defensive, resistance, accepting, and growth process. If you avoid having to go through the defensive, resistance, and acceptance part and just go to the growth part, you get a much better efficiency out of what you work on. And then, of course, when you're trying to go with problem solving, remember to always look at that root cause. You want to make sure that you're solving the root of the issue, not just what you perceive as the problem. Regarding a call of action, I would have to reinforce the message of that Crow the Courageous book, and that's do what we can to be kind to one another. It can literally be life-changing, as small as it is, just to give someone a smile, to open a door for someone, just be human to each other. That would be the call to action. And the little things that we can do, especially for kids, because a confident and happy kid has a better chance of growing up to be a confident and happy adult, and then continue to pass that forward. So one of the call to actions that I have right now is building a community of courage to be able to express the exact thing that I just mentioned, just showing kindness, helping lift each other up. Words are powerful, so watch what you say. And then lastly, if anyone did want to follow up or connect, you can reach me at the samartinostories.com on the website. I also am on Instagram, which is also at Samartino Stories. And then if you'd like to communicate or work on anything, you can also reach out to me at samartinostories@gmail.com.
Thank you so much for everything that you've shared, all the time that you've invested, all the experience that you've given us from all the things that you've been doing, from all of the experience, to say it again, that you have. However, Jim, engagers, as you know by now, it is time to say that it's game over. Hey, engagers, thank you for listening to the Professor Game podcast. And I'd like to know, how are you listening to this podcast? If you're using any type of podcasting app, have you followed and rated this podcast? Please do so if you haven't already. It is absolutely for free. And that way it can help us achieve that mission of reaching more engagers like you that can help us achieve that mission of making learning and gamification and life amazing. So if you want instructions on how to do this in a couple of the apps, at least so it gives you an idea, I'm not sure if your specific app will be there, but you can go to professorgame.com/iTunes and you'll see how it works in a couple of those platforms. And of course, before you go on to your next mission, remember to subscribe, follow, whatever that looks like. Remember, it's all of these things are absolutely for free, using that favorite podcast app, and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.